Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This happened back in 2010 when I was 21. My best friend and I had blown off any sort of responsibility for a whole summer and chose just to party instead. It's probably no surprise that by the end of the summer, we were both evicted. We were roommates, and now we were condemned to our parents' houses until we got our shit together again. One night, we were at my mom's place playing Left 4 Dead until about 2 a.m. when Cam decided to call a cab and then head back to his mom's place. He had to use my phone to call the cab company because he forgot to pay his bill. Yes, I know. We were real winners at this point in our lives. This was also the days before Uber and Lyft, so you'd have to call the station and they'd send for a car over their CP thing. About 15 minutes later, we could see the cab waiting outside and he got in and left. 10 minutes later, I got a call on my cell phone from the cab company. I knew the number by heart, so I knew it was coming from the central station. And when I answered, there was a woman on the line whose voice immediately sent shivers throughout my body. "This is Badger Cab calling for Cameron. His cab has arrived." I was confused and responded with something like, huh? She said, "Tell Cameron to come outside, please." The voice was echoey and distant, like it was an auditory house of mirrors bouncing around a fog-drenched void. I wasn't sure why the voice was creeping me out so much, so I tried pushing it aside and just told her that he already left like 10 minutes ago. I glanced outside the window and saw a car idling outside on the street. It was parked a bit to the right of my house, so all I could see were the brake lights. I figured dispatch probably sent an extra cabbie on accident. I told her that I was sorry, but there must have been a mix-up because he already left. But the woman responded almost like she didn't hear me the first time. "Tell him to come outside," she repeated, but this time with a rigid bite in her tone. "He was already picked up," I repeated. There were a few weird noises for a second, like wind was blowing into the microphone. Then the call dropped. I redialed the number to the cab company and a man answered. I told him what had just happened, leaving out the creepiness of the voice, and let him know that they must have sent 2 cabs on accident. "I don't have any female cab drivers out tonight," the dispatcher told me. I thought to myself, maybe it was a guy with a high-pitched voice. He told me that the driver picked up my friend just fine a while ago, and that a cab driver wouldn't call through their landline like that anyways. When I told him there was a car idling outside and reiterated that there was 100% a woman calling and telling my friend to come outside and get in her car, he started getting very creeped out and worried. We both figured that someone must have had spoofed the cab company's phone number. It's actually pretty easy to do, but that didn't leave us with any comfort. Why was someone spoofing a cab company's phone number and waiting outside their customer's pickup location? How did she even know that Cameron had called for a cab? I hadn't talked to anyone, and Cam didn't have a phone. The dispatcher radioed his driver and made sure he had Cameron and that everything was fine. Then let me know that he was safe and almost to his destination. The dispatcher and I talked on the phone for a couple minutes, brainstorming what the hell could possibly be happening. And from his perspective, it's almost like someone is following and trying to lure a customer in their car, which is probably not good for business. After Cam made it to his mom's crib, he called me on the landline there to ask what was going on. And the only logical explanation he could think of was that it was this stalker that he's been dealing with for several years. He had a restraining order on her because she would follow him, break into his apartment, and wait for him to come home. I would do all sorts of weird, creepy shit like that. I'm not totally convinced that's what was happening though. How would she have known that he had just called for a cab on my phone? How would she have known where my mom lives? If he were leaving my actual place, or the place of one of our close friends, then that would be plausible. But we were pretty tucked away on the outskirts of town in a suburb, and my mom has a different last name than I do, so she couldn't have Googled it. But it's the most logical explanation either of us could come up with. So, it's the one that I'm betting on until someone throws out a better theory. This story goes way back to 1998 when I was 16 years old. I was with my two other friends, who I will call Ben and Jake for privacy reasons. So, it was a late summer evening on a Saturday, and I was sitting in my room listening to some 80s rock as teenagers back then would do. I got bored, and after some time, I went outside to meet Ben and Jake. We were chilling in Ben's garage for a while and drinking beer and smoking some pot. We got bored pretty quickly and went out to do some teenage shit. I remember we were walking down this narrow path by the woods and down towards a lake. Back in the late 90s, there was a popular hangout spot for teenagers there, so we were hoping for seeing some other kids there. But when we arrived, there was no one there except the sound of crickets out in the tall grass. We sat for a while on the bench and just talked for about 15 minutes. When Jake wanted to go to an old fishing hut by the lake, we all agreed on going inside and exploring it. We then entered the hut. While Jake and Ben were walking around and breaking shit, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We went upstairs where there was an old wooden boat lying there with a fishing net over it. We were kind of checking it out when all of a sudden, we heard the wooden door to the hut creak open. We could hear heavy footsteps entering down below, followed by heavy breathing, and we all stopped dead in our tracks and almost held our breath. There was around a 5-second break that felt like an eternity when suddenly a man spoke in a drunken voice. "I know you're there. Come out, wherever you are, you little brats." The heavy footsteps started to walk towards the stairs as the old floor creaked underneath. Jake went inside the wooden boat and the rest of us followed, and we put the fishing net over our heads and didn't move. The man arrived upstairs and we could hear him stumbling around. "I can hear you." We were sitting dead still, but I could feel the fear in all of us. The man was walking around and moving stuff. I was thinking of a plan to escape without being caught, but we literally were like sitting ducks. Suddenly, we could feel the fishing net being ripped off. "Here you are." Jake reacted the fastest and pushed him away, so the man fell onto his back, and we all ran like hell out of there and through the tall grass into the woods. We could hear the man give a chase, but then he gave up, probably due to his drunken state. We all went back to Ben's garage and fell onto the couch out of exhaustion. Jake then told us that the man dropped the knife when he fell on the floor, and we all sat there in shock for the rest of the night. So to this day, I can't help myself but wonder, what would have happened if Jake didn't push the man? This happened to me during the summer of 2017. I'm a girl and I was 19 during the events. I am going to stay vague regarding the details, the country where it happened, the origins of the people, and the name of the places, because I don't want to be recognized or cause bad reputation to any community. It is not really scary, but it's still creepy, and at the end of the story is so crazy that I still can't believe it to this day. I was living in an apartment with my family. On the parking lot, there were always several guys repairing cars. I used to come back home pretty late, and often I see these guys just talking and sometimes saying good evening to me. And at one time I got as a joke, "We kept you a spot." But nothing really inappropriate, and I would just answer politely. I had noticed that one of them had a tuned-up sedan and must be living in the same building as me, but a different entrance because in the morning, the car was parked there. It was a really recognizable car. And one morning, as I was going to my work, I realized that this car is parked next to mine. Well, he doesn't live far, so it's not that weird. But when I started to sit in my car, I realized that the owner is actually sitting in his car and looking at me, smiling. Well, okay, it's 8:30 a.m., so why not? I start to drive to get to my work, and I'm in this special roundabout where you have to stop inside if a car on the right is coming, which is the case, so I stopped. I'm looking on the right to see when I can go, and realize that in the second lane, the car is there. And as soon as I take the road for work, he's just right behind me. Even when we get real close, he is still there. I was working in a mall with the biggest hypermarket of the neighborhood, so I thought maybe he was going for groceries. And I get in the underground parking lot and park. He does the same and right next to me. I chose to ignore him and go for the escalator. Well, guess what he does? He does the same thing and starts to talk to me. "Hello, I'm Steve, and you?" "I'm Anna." "How old are you?" "I'm 19. "I'm 27. Is that a problem?" No." "Okay, so you work here?" "Yes." "Okay, well, see you tonight. Bye." So at this moment, I realized that he was not speaking the language well. I answered the questions because he didn't seem scary. And well, I really didn't want to make a scene. When he said bye, I thought, yeah, I see him every night in my parking lot with his friends, so it's normal. But when I finished work, the exact same thing in the morning happened, and while I sat in my car, I realized the guy was right next to me. Since I was surprised and he seemed really eager to talk to me, I got out and was like, "What are you doing here?" "I have something for you." Then he smiles really big. "What? No!" And he gave me a red rose. Embarrassed and shocked, I refused it a couple of times, but he kept on insisting. And I knew the only way that I would get rid of him would be to accept it, which I did, and then he left. I kept the flower in my car so my family didn't realize that something is happening, and I threw it in the trash can outside later. So this was the beginning of the week, and he started to wait for me after work to give me drinks or to ask me out for cinema or to a restaurant. And I refused everything, but ended up accepting the drinks to make him leave. In the weekend, I had a second job, and I had these late shifts in a fast food. It was my first shift there since everything happened, and I was closing the restaurant with 3 other colleagues. Since it's pretty dark and late, there was a rule that one of us had to leave first and drive around the restaurant to make sure that it was safe for everyone. I wouldn't do that normally, but this night, I had a really weird feeling that he might be there. So I volunteered for the drive. And well, right on the spot, he was parked next to my car. It was 1 a.m., so how long was he waiting for? I told him to go a bit further, otherwise, we can't leave, which he did. After my colleagues left, I stopped next to his car and opened the window just to explain to him why I reacted like that. And before I knew it, he opened his car door and got into my car. I just want to remind you that this man knew where I worked, where I lived, what my car looked like, and who my family was, and it was a neighbor, and that's why I never wanted to make a scene. But at this very moment, I was scared for my life. A 27-year-old muscular guy that I didn't know was in my car at 1 a.m. in an empty parking lot. He seemed talkative, and I didn't have any other choice, so I decided to listen to him and learn stuff about him too. He said that he arrived in the country in 2014 at the capital. He stayed there 2 years, and in 2017, he got in our neighborhood. I did the math and realized that a year was missing. I asked about it, and he answered, "I was in jail." "Why were you in jail?" "Well, I didn't have papers, and I made a car accident." Okay, it wasn't that scary in the end, which reassured me, and the guy said goodnight and then he left. There were many times where I checked the inside mirror and would see that he was right behind me. I wouldn't know since when, and even to this day, I check really often to know if a car is following me. Once, I was washing the dishes during a late shift. I had my phone and I was texting friends, which were 2 guys, to let them know when I was finishing so that we could meet. And when I was working, I had to leave my phone. And maybe half an hour later, a colleague comes to me and says, "Hey, your friend ordered at the drive-thru and asked for you." "Oh, yes, I told him that I wanted to meet later." I then took my phone and said, "So you came by? Were you alone?" "What are you talking about?" And at this moment I knew. I rushed to my colleague and asked her to describe the guy and the car. And well, it was Steve. There were so many cases of things like that happening. He followed me to my friends, threatened to reveal stuff about a friend to his dad that he knew. Also, one of his friends, Carl, who I spotted on my parking lot, had followed me a couple of times too. A friend who knew who Carl was told me that he was married, he had kids, and was like 40, and I was so shocked. One evening, around 10 p.m., I parked and saw a friend or neighbor getting home. It's been a while since we talked, so he said he'll be back in 2 so we can chat. And while waiting, I'm getting my stuff in the trunk. This is when the car parked behind me. It flashes its lights at me, and I didn't have to turn around to guess who it was. I had been patient, since nothing too crazy had happened, and I didn't want to scare or create problems to my family. But this night, I was pretty pissed off, and it was happening right next to my place. I threw my stuff and I rushed at the car. Both Steve and Carl were there, and I told them to leave me and to stop following me. Steve didn't say a word, and Carl just smiled and said goodnight, and I didn't answer and left. And well, it worked, because they didn't bother me for months. Steve changed his car and now had a black one, which was still a really recognizable car. He followed me a few more times, and one day, he tried to talk to me with a friend that could translate well what he said. Again, Steve didn't really speak the language well. I explained well to his friend that I wasn't interested, and it was the last time that I talked to him. However, Months later, I see in my neighborhood this kid that I knew from sports, and I knew he lived in an apartment at about the same place as Steve. The whole thing was over, but it was always in the back of my head. I didn't really know who the guy was and didn't know if this would start again. So I was curious, and you know how curiosity is a bad thing. I started to talk to him. I was like, "Hey, do you know the guy that lives in your building?" I describe a physical trait of Steve to him. "Oh, yeah, this guy." And he also gives a description. I answer, No, the guy who owns a black car." "Oh, you mean my dad?" I froze. I have no idea how this conversation ended, since it's still a big shock even to this day. I know, I didn't tell him anything about his dad's behavior though. I knew this kid for so many years, and he was actually the son of this guy. And he had 3 or 4 brothers and sisters. Then I realized the guy had totally lied about his age because the kid was like 15, and I believed him like an idiot. But this is not the end of the stunning discoveries. A few days later, I met a friend who knows about these events and tell her that the kid that she knows too is his son. She looked at me so shocked and she said, "All this time, it was this guy? What? You know him?" "He left his country because he stole money from powerful people, and then he joined his family here, but he got in jail for suspicion of terrorism." "What?" And I remember that when he followed me, he would actually stop when I would drive in the direction of the police station. I just thought it was because he still had issues with his papers. She kept talking and showed me a video. "This is his wife here, and the second woman is his second wife. She was so tired of him talking to other girls that she went to their country to find a second wife." I just want to be precise here that my friend was coming from the same country as this guy, but she was born here, and that's why she had this kind of information. It's a small community, so they kind of all know each other. I was very lucky that nothing happened to me, and I still can't believe it, and I wonder how it could have gone if I acted differently. So this was 3 years ago, right before the pandemic hit, and it's now one of my favorite stories to tell, now that I'm no longer scared and I've moved 1,000 miles away and a few years' time has passed. So my husband was in the military during this time, and I was a housewife, due to work being hard for me to get in the area that I was in, as I can't drive and live off base. Well, any military person knows military schedule is pretty darn predictable, and much of our lives ran on an easy-to-memorize schedule, and to make matters worse, my husband was often gone for long hours. For about 2 to 3 months, I'd been seeing this guy wandering around my home and peeking in windows. Honestly, I didn't originally think much of it beyond being weirded out. We didn't have anything that would interest the robber. No TV, a single 7-year-old computer, a broken couch and a table, and a mattress on the floor. Literally nothing expensive in our home beyond a gun that was locked up in a safe that may have looked like it had stuff. But that's a lot of work for what looks like a home of people living in poverty. So I didn't think anything of it. Yet, he kept coming back when my husband was gone. I'd see him every few days or hear him due to my normally super sweet cat at that time hating him, hissing and yowling when he saw him, so I know that he was there when I hear my cat making an angry fuss. Well, one day, I went out with my husband And I guess I didn't lock the door or something properly, as our lock would be a bit funny and I was running late. According to our normal schedule, I'd have gone to base with my husband for family mandatory fun, and I'd have to come back home alone in an Uber, while my husband stayed on base to work or hang with his friends. What ended up happening was I fell sick with a migraine. I have hemiplegic migraine, so it can really be serious, and his sergeant told me to take me home and take care of me when he saw me. Now, before I go on, I should probably describe my old home. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment complex in the mountains. It was a massive complex. My home layout was this. My front door led to my kitchen and dining area, and my kitchen and dining area wall next to my door was another glass door. Think a patio door. And across from my kitchen was my room. Then, you go down the hall and hit the living room that has another glass door wall next to the fireplace. And finally after that, you go across the living room at the end of the hall and you hit our guest room, or my plant room, cat's playroom or guest room, with yet another glass door wall. I was literally surrounded by giant glass doors. Then outside, we had a porch, and on the porch was a storage closet where I usually kept my bike as I couldn't drive due to my migraines and seizures. Now, back to the story now that I've set the scene. So when my husband brought me home again, not per our normal schedule, we came home to find our doors slightly ajar. We gave each other a look and went inside anyways, with me mumbling how I must have not locked properly due to us being in a rush that morning. We walked into the kitchen, where my husband immediately went to the fridge and started looking around for water for himself and me. He then spoke for the first time while in the fridge. Honestly, I don't remember what he even said. But then we heard something, maybe a few seconds after he spoke. Our porch glass door in the back of our home moved. We both knew the sound really well, as I liked to sit on the porch reading for hours, so I was always coming in and out. He then grabbed my shoulder and whispered to grab his gun from our room, and he then grabbed a butcher's knife and went towards the living room. I went and grabbed the gun, noticing on my way into our room, our living room glass porch door was wide open. Upon giving my husband the gun and following behind him, as I dialed 911 in my panic, saying that I had an active break-in, while my husband did a sweep of our home. And while I was on the phone upon coming back down the hall towards the kitchen to see if he went around back up and to the front, as we lived on a literal mountainside, and one side was blocked off out back. We heard our storage door out back that we forgot to shut slam open. Me and my husband ran out back where I found our storage door swinging open and just barely saw the same guy who had been spying on me in our home. He didn't end up coming back that day. I also later found that only things missing were some of my clothes, lingerie, and bathroom care products. The police showed up 4 hours later and took a statement from me and my husband. Eventually, my husband had to return to his normal schedule. I was terrified and he didn't like it, but we had no choice till we could find a new place in 3 months when our contract ended. The first week things were fine. He didn't come back yet, and my cat didn't yowl or throw any fits, so he didn't see him either, and things were fine that week. Then another week went by. I started to think maybe the gun we brought out scared him. No. The 3rd week, he ended up coming back while my husband was at work in the morning. He first tried the door and was trying to force it open, and then started banging on the glass next to the door. I put 911 on speaker and texted my husband while I panicked and cried. And while I was on the 911 call, he ended up leaving and giving up. And when I voiced that he walked away from the door, The 911 dispatcher lady spoke to me like I was being ridiculous for freaking out this badly over someone trying to get in my locked door. I hung up and finally called my husband while I had a full-on panic attack, and it turns out that he was already coming home with a car full of his and my friends, also in the army, whom worked with him, as they turned around towards me soon as I texted what was going on. He ended up going to the back door and trying both glass doors there as well, before finally giving up. And about 4 minutes later, my husband and his friends arrived and found me clutching my cat and crying. They ended up scanning the area and still didn't find him. The cops showed up 7 hours later, and I, very angry this time, gave another report. I ended up with 3 of the guys sleeping over in the spare room, and my husband and me slept in our now locked and bolted bedroom. Then the next day, me and my husband's friends went out and got and installed cameras in all our doors and window areas. After this last time, beyond him going back to looking into our windows 3 more times, I had never had another issue till I moved out shortly thereafter this, and since, I never saw him again. This happened last month. The area that I go to the gym in has good and bad parts. I am in the good part, but over the last month now, I'm not so sure anymore. I will also say that the area that I am in at the moment, we have had an issue with a guy who lives around the gym and likes to tailgate women and chase them in his car, and he seems to only do this when they are alone in the car. So basically, I had a guy follow me when I was walking home at night, but as someone who used to volunteer at an AOD center, nothing really phases me, and I am rarely scared. So there is me walking home, and as I am walking home, or at least around the corner from the gym, some guy in his 50s and 60s starts following me, and so I go a different route, and I lose him. I come back to the gym a few days later, and this time much earlier, but the guy is back again, wandering around aimlessly drunk near the gym, buying pizza next door. I am thinking, shit, okay. So he then afterwards decides to start looking into people's cars. I was thinking, hell, this guy might want to break into the cars. I am with a friend, and at that time, I noticed that he is looking at his car. I warned him, and he leaves the gym and goes into his car. He then drives home, and I notice that he isn't wanting to break into people's cars, but instead something else. By that point, I am thinking that he wants to look for my car even though I walk to the gym. I am on the elliptical machine, and I feel safe in the gym even though he is outside, because no one can come into the gym unless you're a member. Otherwise, the alarm goes off if you try to open the door. To get into the gym, you would need a key card. This would give you a better understanding on how I felt safe. I also had other people around me, and I wasn't alone in the gym. So lo and behold, this guy looks at me through the glass window, and I am facing the window. So he waves at me and writes down his name and number on a piece of paper and shoves it against the window that I am directly facing. I shake my head going no, and he leaves. I am thinking, this guy originally came from the pub nearby, as we do have a habit of dealing with drunk people from the pub. Doesn't help that there's a bottle shop nearby, in a kebab place, as well as the pizza place that I mentioned. I swear, my best guy friend lives in that suburb, and he keeps telling me how it's changing due to the number of halfway houses nearby. And here are the top comments for my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.